Personalizing student engagement is only possible when enrollment management and Marcom are aligned. At Abraham Baldwin Agricultural College, Ryan Hogan's team uses Element 451 to improve student outcomes.
They love the AI functions where if they're coming up with an email campaign, they can ask it to help develop something and then they go in and edit that. They also really enjoy the use of the landing pages for the campaigns that we build. So not only do we design emails and things, but we can also have landing pages that can give information to our students. And so it really brings the team together. So our enrollment staff is helping identify what the issue is, and then the marketing and communication staff can collaborate with them in Element to provide the solution for the problem we're trying to solve.
Aligned teams create better experiences for students. Visit element451.com to learn how an AI-first student engagement platform fuels a smarter, more connected campus experience. Hi, I'm a former higher ed CMO, and I have a confession to make. Higher ed has a perception problem, and I think how we communicate about it is partly to blame. In this conversation with Dale Leatherwood, we talk about how individual institutions can shift the narrative around the value of a degree, especially in an AI-driven world, and especially when talking to non-traditional and adult learners. I'm so excited to introduce you to Dale Leatherwood, who is the Chief Marketing Officer for Columbia Southern University. He's in his 27th year of marketing and executive experience in training and higher education. Prior to joining Columbia Southern University, Dale was the Vice President of Brand, Public Relations, and Communications for American Public Education and was the VP of Marketing for Rasmussen University before its acquisition by APEI. During his career, Dale has been a marketing executive for both colleges and higher education-focused marketing agencies and has developed and led 2 online college campuses. In addition, he has served as a consultant with several universities on marketing and distance learning initiatives, while co-founding an education concierge firm serving working professionals seeking an online degree. I hope you enjoy this episode. Welcome to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, a podcast that empowers higher ed marketers to bring innovation, creativity, and excellence to their work. I'm your host, Jaime Hunt. Join me every 2 weeks for discussions with some of the best minds in higher education marketing. Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO is part of the Enrollify Network, a robust collection of podcasts designed to help higher educational professionals like you grow. Explore our other shows at enrollify.org or check out some of my personal favorites linked in the show notes below. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered, all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com. I'm so excited to have you on the show, Dale. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm very, very happy to be here.
We were talking a couple of weeks ago about what do we want to talk about on this show? And we both got really passionate about this idea of sort of that shifting skepticism about the value of a degree in higher education. And we were just riffing off each other. And I thought we need to record this conversation. So here we are. I would love to hear from your perspective as someone who has worked with a lot of students and a lot of students in different demographics. What do you think is driving that skepticism about the value of a college degree?
Sure. And there certainly is, at least from the perception that you see in the media, a lot of that skepticism. I will tell you that my point of view comes from the fact that I've spent the majority of my career working with what used to be called non-traditional students, that they are now potentially the plurality, where working adults, people going back to school, finishing a degree or getting an advanced degree. And I think their perspective is a little bit more honed because they're making the decision for themselves. And what really illuminated this for me was there was a very recent survey the Gallup organization did with the Lumina Foundation. And they surveyed, I think it was 14,000 adults, 18 to over 50, I believe. And most of them had not completed a college degree or they were in school. And two really interesting things came out of that. First of all, what really surprised me, because it was in opposition to what you hear, 91% of current bachelor's degree students and almost 90% of community college students are confident their degree will help them get a job. And 64% of those who dropped out, who have no degree and are no longer in college, felt that earning a four-year degree would be worth it. Mm-hmm. And so that was very encouraging. The flip side was only 18% believe that a four-year college degree or college charges fair prices. And that goes up to 40% for two-year colleges. But still, what that told me is that there's not really skepticism about ROI. It's skepticism, or the return part of ROI, I should say. The skepticism's on the investment side. They know the value. They worry excessively about the cost.
Yeah.
And whether it's cost transparency or just affordability. And that's really the specific area that I think the skepticism lies.
That's really interesting that you break it down, like the ROI.
Yeah.
They're cool with the R, but not so much the I. And it makes sense when you think about the cost of college rising, sometimes outpacing inflation. But when you think about some students graduating with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and thinking about having to pay off what would be equivalent to a small mortgage for their degree, that's a massive investment in the future and in their education.
It is. And I think what's important to remember, though, is we read a lot about, or we think a lot about, the people who have that six-figure debt. And frankly, those are really outliers. The vast majority of students who owe money don't owe a tremendous dollar amount. It's just that dollar amount just lingers and lasts, and you're always paying it off. And if you find yourself in a situation where it could be $100 a month, right? If you're making $30,000 a year after that degree, you feel it. If you are someone who went to an relatively expensive private school with a degree in elementary education, chances are, unless you've got some really healthy scholarship, or if you didn't depend on financial aid or loans, where most people do, frankly, you're never going to be on the right side of that. It's just hard, right? And so the career aspect of getting that degree, I use that example all the time, the career aspect and the satisfaction aspect of getting a degree like that is lifelong. I still remember my first grade teacher. But you're paying for that for almost, it feels like, the rest of your life. And that's the investment side that really stings for a lot of people.
Well, yeah. And teaching requires a degree. That is
100%.
a field that you have to have a degree. And so I guess some of it is helping young people make the choice about where they go to school and what type of institution they go to based on what their expected earning potential might be.
Absolutely. And also, what are the opportunities, using, again, teaching as that example, where you have to have a degree, but you also, in many districts, can get a stair step in your salary by getting a grad degree. And so while you may make the traditional choice for your undergrad, being very strategic on where and how you get a grad degree so you can get that bump in pay can be very important. And at that point, you're probably in your 30s. You've probably got a family. You've got additional expenses. And so that's where it gets more complex. Those are the students I've typically worked with. That's where it gets more complex. And the decision-making factors around that ROI become a little bit more stringent in order to make it a positive ROI in the long term.
Yeah. I have a friend who is an elementary education teacher who chose Western Governors because she felt that she could get a much better ROI. She could get that bump for the lowest possible investment. And in her perspective, she'd been teaching for probably 17-ish years. She felt like there wasn't a lot new to learn.
Exactly.
So a school like Western Governors was a perfect fit for her for that.
Exactly. It's a credential. It's checking a box in many cases. And for a school like Western Governors or Southern New Hampshire or my institution, the ability to do so and check that box at an affordable price, which is why schools like that and even our schools are seeing such rapid growth, but just very large student bodies, because they offer a very clear value proposition. Their transparency is through the roof. You know what you're getting, you know what you need to put into it, and you know exactly what the cost is, and therefore you can calculate the ROI very easily.
So I think I'm hearing you say that it's not that people feel like college isn't worth it. It's that people are more questioning the overall cost of that education. And I'm really curious about what you feel students and families are telling us, either explicitly or through their actions, about what their expectations are for that investment and the return that they get on it.
Sure. I think what's interesting is people are behaving about education the way they're behaving about products or services at large. We are far more informed about the cost and the cost of expectation. Think about buying a car, for example. We can go, there are entire companies who try to educate you on the invoice value or the book value of that vehicle and what it costs the dealer, et cetera. And so I think for families or individuals, they're telling us that you can draw a direct line from the cost to the outcome. They're interested. You can get in the selection set. That's where it starts. And despite the issues they may have, the big Ivies, they're never going to hurt for that, right? But if you think about the regional publics, there are large numbers of them, or the small private institutions, if they can't answer a simple question, which is, why do we deserve to win? What do they have to offer in terms of affordability or accessibility or unique instruction that the lower cost option with the same accreditation can offer? Then you're not going to have that opportunity to go beyond that level of interest. So drawing that direct line, students saying, what's in it for me, just as they would with anything else that we purchase that has that big of a ticket on it. A university degree, a college degree, is going to probably be the second or third most expensive thing we'll ever spend on a house and a vehicle. You would not make the decisions around a house or vehicle in 2025 the same way that we generally think of you making a decision about a university degree, particularly as an adult. I know if you were to buy a house today, you started Zillow and you would do everything possible, and you get quotes on your interest rate, et cetera, because you want to make sure you're going to get out of it what you put into it. It's the same thing with a degree. You got to be able to clearly elucidate what is the outcome that's tied to that investment.
Well, and I'm curious about on the investment side, and we've touched on this a little bit, but that idea of transparency. And higher ed is incredibly classic for not posting the sticker price. So this is what the sort of base price is. And then some little asterisk that's like, 50% of students receive discounting on the sticker price or receive some sort of aid. And we don't even necessarily articulate, is that aid grants or scholarships, or is that aid need-based or merit-based, or is it loans? I feel like there's a lot of work that needs to happen on that cost transparency. And I would love to get your thoughts around that.
Well, again, I think for those of us in the education space, we need to put ourselves in the place of a consumer. And even if you have to do analogies to other industries, think about the other industry that is beset with frustration about transparency, which is medical. If let's pretend you didn't have insurance, or even if you do have insurance, if you go into an emergency room or doctor's visits not planned, you have absolutely no idea what's going to be on that bill.
Nope.
And you don't understand what's on the bill. You don't understand why you're getting charged this much for nothing, it seems like. And there's these codes. It's incredibly frustrating. And despite the fact that they may have been completely valid, you feel like you're getting ripped off because you don't know what you don't know. And we used to say that all the time with our consulting clients who are looking for a degree. They don't know what they don't know. And so that leads to frustration. So from my perspective, what colleges and universities could do a lot better job of is what I call maniacal transparency. And it's not just the obvious of the award letter, which is getting better. It's still not as clear as it should be, but it's getting better. But also disclosing things like what other fees come with the cost of the degree. I was actually doing some work today we have a cost comparison calculator. I was updating that and I was looking at some fees, and I realized for this one institution I was evaluating, the cost of the fees were nearly 40% of the cost of the tuition.
Wow.
Per hour. It was like $190 per hour in fees for these degrees. And I'm thinking, no one knows that. And the reality is, let's take the top 30 football programs, because there are tons of football fans. The reality is more people would know more about the ins and outs of each of those football teams. They do about the ins and outs of what it costs to go to that school and figure out the investment understanding in a very clear way that the school wants you to understand is critical, and that you feel like there's not the level of opacity that is rife in other industries, and that we're trying to help you make a really good decision. So maniacal transparency is, I think, the way of the future. You talked about Western Governors or Southern New Hampshire, some of the largest brands in the non-traditional space. It is incredibly clear what it costs to go to school there. And that's why so many people choose them, because you're in and out, certainly, but you know exactly what you're getting into. And I think if more institutions take at least steps in that direction, as the student population shifts to older students or students who are juggling more types of costs in their life, it's going to be a requirement, or you just won't win.
Why do you think schools don't put that transparency out there?
That's a dangerous question. I'll be honest with you. I think some of them do it because, frankly, they're afraid of sticker shock.
Mm-hmm.
They know that if they plainly push the cost, that is going to overwhelm the eyes, right? If it costs $40,000 a year to go to a university, that's a big round number. And there may be another few $1,000s in fees on top of that. And so some schools feel they have to break that down into the components or the nets or all that. And so if you're in a situation where if I show you the costs and you can't understand immediately what your actual bill is going to be, it's just like going to the hospital.
Yeah.
And none of us want to, if we get hurt, if I broke my leg falling down the stairs, I promise you the first thing I'm going to think of is not, oh, my leg is broken. I promise you the first thing all of us will think of is, how much is this going to cost me?
Yes.
Isn't that scary?
Yes.
Right?
I've sat and weighed, do I go?
Exactly. Or God forbid, do I call an ambulance? Because, oh my gosh, what's that going to cost me? And so if you're a parent or you're an adult thinking about going to school, the first thing you think is, oh my God, I have no idea how much this is going to cost me. It's going to create paralysis and you're not going to move forward. So the reason schools do that, I think, is an outdated mode of, if I can kind of wash this cost down and into the smallest possible number, I can at least get them in the door.
Mm-hmm.
That's not going to work. It's just not going to work, because what will happen is today students will go into Perplexity or ChatGPT or Google Gemini and say, how much is the true cost to go to XYZ? They'll figure it out. And maybe the answer will be right, maybe it won't be, but they will figure it out. And without you being able to control that narrative.
Well, and I think this is even more important as we're recruiting these non-traditional learners, because to your point, it's easier for me to spend mom and dad's money than it is to spend my own money.
100%.
You know, like
100%.
I paid for my graduate degree and I was very cost conscious about what I was going to have to spend on my graduate degree. But I remember being enormously frustrated trying to figure out what programs were going to cost me. And it wasn't necessarily that I wanted the cheapest program, but I didn't want to enroll and then find out my bill's $60,000.
Right.
And that was so stressful for me as a adult learner, going into a graduate program. And I can only imagine how frustrating it is for people who are outside of higher ed. I knew what to look for.
100%.
Lots of people don't.
100%. And I did a presentation, I've done this a few times, at an education conference earlier this year. And it was about websites and transparency and a few other topics. And I brought up a university on the screen, and I invited someone else up and offered to give them a Starbucks gift card if in 4 minutes they could find the tuition. And I invited the crowd to help, like Price is Right, help them, guide them through. And they were screaming and yelling, and we went to page to page to page. At about 2.5 minutes, I paused the clock and I asked people, raise your hand if you would have given up by now.
Mm.
And they all did. And I said, you do this for a living and you can't find, and I asked them to find the cost per credit hour. They did it for a living. They couldn't find it. And yes, it's better than it used to be. I promise you, I've been doing this for many years. It's so much better than it used to be. But if you compare the time it takes to find the tuition for one of your programs on your website as compared to, love them or hate them, the mega sites at Southern New Hampshire or Governors or others, compare the path. and compare the time and compare the ease and compare the transparency and understanding, and you will see exactly why Southern New Hampshire has a couple 100,000 students.
That's so true. And I think about the notion of if you have to ask, you can't afford it.
Exactly.
And I think that applies to higher ed. And I remember I was at Radford University, and the president, who's long gone from there, she didn't want tuition to be a direct link from like the top nav drop downs. And I remember actually saying to her, I think people are going to think if you have to ask, you can't afford it. And that got her to say like, okay, yep, you're right. We should put it on there. But she kind of had that like, well, if we tell them how much it is, they may not want to come. And I'm thinking, A, we were one of the most affordable publics in Virginia. So we compare favorably to some of the other schools. But B, nobody's going to register for college not knowing what, at least roughly what their cost is going to be.
100%.
Absolutely no one is going to do that.
100%.
I would love to pivot a little bit because you work with a lot of adult learners and non-traditional students. I would love to get your thoughts around how institutions can better align their academic offerings with what the workforce is looking for today without necessarily losing sight of that, liberal education, liberal arts, critical thinking, those sorts of things. How can universities better align in that space?
Sure. I think I'd like to maybe focus on the latter part of your question, because I think a lot of the workforce needs is actually easier now than perhaps it used to be, because there are lots of services that go out and look at hiring trends and try to get around the curve. Certainly, every university should be talking to their academic teams, their academic councils, their advisory boards, their communities. If you're having trouble figuring out what the workforce needs are in your area, you maybe need to take a step back and reflect what you're doing in the first place. So I would say that. However, the trick, I think, is understanding that the questions around higher ed are really, they're trying to pit the trades against higher ed. That's just basically what the zeitgeist is, right? Learn to fix air conditioners versus get a degree in history. That is not an either or situation. I think you could have your cake and eat it too. And I think the way we communicate that as an industry, and our university, we have gen eds like everyone else. It creates a well-rounded student, even for working adults who may have taken most of them. And, I was thinking about this the other day. First of all, we can remind people that the liberal arts and cultural thinking is really what built Western civilization and culture. Thomas Jefferson, George Washington, Socrates, the Greeks to the Romans to the Renaissance to the founding fathers, they were all about the liberal arts and culture, right? It was not just learning, engineering or farming or whatever their trades were. They were expected, if they were going to have any sort of education, that it would be predominantly liberal arts, critical thinking, the arts, etc. So that's a mainstay of Western culture and Western civilization. But in practicality, there are terrific stories, and thousands of them of people from all types of universities who have technical degrees, vocational degrees, whose favorite course in college was a liberal arts or an art or a science. The physics major who remembers fondly their drama course, the engineering major who loved that music class or being introduced to art. One of my favorite classes was an art history class, right? It's about, not, I won't say the well-rounded person, but it's about the ability to connect and use analogies and be able, I always say, to be able to put an employee in the elevator with your boss and not be worried what's going to happen when they get to the fifth floor. We need to tell these stories. One of the persons who told these stories the best was Albert Einstein. He was emphatic that the liberal arts studies were critical to be able to think. And in an era where we're all moving headfirst into AI, our ability to think outside of ourselves is going to be absolutely the difference maker. And so that type of added benefit that comes with a college degree that may not come with a boot camp or learning from Google or learning in a self-paced course, those are fantastic. But we also have something as a college to say about interjecting and injecting into people icing on the cake.
How do we communicate that? How do we communicate the value of that? I think that's the biggest challenge I've had throughout my career is how do we tell students that this liberal arts, this critical thinking, these quote unquote soft skills are essential and important?
Yeah, I think first of all, what you're talking about really is how do we convince them that a degree, it kind of boils down to that's what a degree is. It's those soft skills, it's the things, because we're all required, if you're an undergrad, 120 credit hours or so. If it's graduate, 30 to 36 credit hours. Well, not all of those are in your major, right? And so you're required by the university to do all these things. And as by definition, that means a degree requires stuff that you may think you don't need. Let's just be for real, right? But first of all, then I think you have to be willing to be honest with yourself and make sure you could actually find that value in your university. So if the answer is yes, there is value in what you're going to be taking in terms of the curriculum or the course offerings or the electives, et cetera, then be transparent about it, right? Talk specifically about how a particular course or even part of the curriculum can make a difference to a specific workforce or to you as an employee. I use my art history example or history as a whole. There are so many examples of the way you can connect A to B and C, and it creates a whole. Whereas someone who only had B or C is going to be, frankly, incomplete. Now, particular example, can your communication courses teach you how to engage both with AI in your job, but also real people in the sales environment, right? If I was just trained on AI and prompt writing, I may not be the best person to actually sell my services to a real human being who has to buy from me, right? And so that combination is a difference maker. So talk about how that comms course or that comms elective or that comms curriculum adds the icing to the cake to make you a little bit different than your competition. Show that. Can your master's in public administration degree, of which there are 1,000 online, can that teach someone how to align public need with the priorities of a budget? Show me specifically. So we can talk about it by saying, with an MPA degree, you also have electives in speech or writing or whatever, and that's going to make you a better asset for your employer, and exactly how that's going to happen. So people will understand it if you're transparent with them and share with them real world examples that will separate your institution from the next, or to be more specific, separate your institution from the non-degree options that we know are all coming.
AI-powered and people-focused. This is the future of higher ed. Join us in Charlotte, June 24th and 25th for the 2025 Engage Summit. Learn how AI transforms student engagement by blending scalability with authenticity. Enrollify listeners get $50 off registration with the code Enrollify50. Register now at engage.element451.com. Well, and that's one of the things I talk about when I give presentations to cabinets about, AI and why it's important for us to be thinking about how to prepare students, how to use it. I talk about the headwinds being that we're not competing necessarily with the university down the road. We're competing with the university down the road and all of those other options. Google, Coursera, basically you could have ChatGPT write a curriculum for you to learn
100%.
any topic, but it's not necessarily giving you everything that you need to be in the professional world and to be able to. I think for me, one of the benefits of higher education is being able to chart your own path in life, right?
Mm-hmm.
And not necessarily being stuck in one road. If you go into a trade and you go to school to be a plumber, you're a plumber, right? You don't necessarily, maybe I stopped liking plumbing, but that's what my training is in. And I'm not an electrician. I'm not a carpenter. So I think one of the things that 4-year degrees, master's degrees, that sort of thing gives you that ability to kind of pivot and change in life. And I'm really, really want your thoughts, because I think you're incredibly smart about all of these things, about how AI can be worked into the college experience in a way to prepare students for jobs that do not exist today so that they can continue to pivot and chart their course in their lives.
100%. And I want to touch on what you said, because it was really illuminating in that a good college experience, if it does nothing else, it teaches you how to think. And here's where that plugs into AI. and not to, boil it down too simply. But I've been saying this lately in terms of my own organization and how we will hire for the future. And I'll use a sports analogy because I'm way too full of those. Going forward, I want to hire the best available athlete because I can teach them pretty much anything. And if not that, AI can do pretty much anything. I need someone who can think, right? Who can be proactive, who can engage in a true and efficient solution to a challenge, but more importantly, foresee challenges and opportunities around the corner. And I think that's where the ability for people in a university environment to be able to combine the tools of AI with their ability to think proactively, to be not necessarily intelligent, but to be smart about what they're trying to achieve, but then let AI handle the drudgery. I think about the transition from slide rules and the other tools they used to use in engineering courses back in the early 20th century or 19th century, and the calculator came out. People said, oh, it's going to make people dumb, and it's cheating. You can't use it. We look back on that. That's ridiculous. It released the power. Now, that's not to say AI isn't incredibly scary. It is. If you're saying it's not, you're lying. I always tell people I just wanted to be the Matrix and not the Terminator. But as a student and as a faculty and as an administration, we can't fight that tide. And so how can we help students learn to think, to leverage AI as a tool instead of replacing their ability to think and then produce better output? And the trick's going to be people are inherently procrastinators and lazy. We're evolutionary bound by that, right? Yes. We'll put it off or we'll just avoid doing it. And AI makes that very easy. So a college is not designed to make life easy. College is designed to put obstacles in front of you to then get smarter and better. So the ability for a university to say, we're going to teach you how to balance, get smarter, think better, and then how to decide when and how to use AI to accomplish the next thing. And then employers, I think, will eat that up.
I need students to understand, and this was talked about in last week's episode, but I need students to understand that without any foundational knowledge in the topic that you're leveraging the AI tool on, it's going to be this sort of generic garbage that's going to out you as not knowing what you're doing. Like it truly is, I know it's been said before, but garbage in, garbage out. And if you don't have the expertise, you're not going to be able to get the output that's actually solid and going to drive your organization forward. And I think right now we have a lot of stars in our eyes about what generative AI can do. And I think what we need to really discover and explore further is it can't just be a monkey pounding on a keyboard to get these outcomes. It needs to be people with really strong critical thinking skills and expertise in the area that they're working with the AI in. And then you can take it. It's like it takes that power that you have in your own brain and amplifies it and takes that to the next level and helps you do more with that. Yes. But you can't have just one. You can't have just the AI. And I think in the year 2025, you can't have just the human brain anymore. 100%. We have to be working in partnership.
Yes, I couldn't say it better. And I think we are at we'll look back on this time with either dread or excitement on what happened as a result. And if people go in the direction that you said, I think the future is bright. It has the ability to take over, right? And I hear organizations talking about they're going to let AI do the work of so many of these jobs, which certainly makes sense from an efficiency perspective. What I fear is you end up with a world of beige and sort of the efficiency is king and everything is sort of smooth. What I hope is that people use it as an accelerant to get new ideas and better ideas faster that will allow us to propel everybody, whether it be career-wise or personally. And it takes smart people to not only decide how to do that, but also smart people to understand where the guardrails need to be put in.
Yeah.
I'm almost too old to worry about that now. I need someone who's my kids' age, they're in their 20s, to be able to say, you know what, we could. It's like the line from Jurassic Park. You were so excited about thinking you could do it, you never thought, should I?
Yes.
We need smart people who are in elementary, high school, and college age now to make those decisions of, should I? and put those guardrails in place so that we're propelling forward and not just bursting through every dam that exists.
Yeah. Well, and I think your earlier point about humans being inherently lazy, I mean, that's evolutionarily accurate, right? Our brains are designed to conserve energy.
Right.
Our bodies have not adjusted to the 21st century way of living where food is ample for most people, shelter is ample for most people. Our bodies still think it's conserve energy, and brain power burns energy, right? So we're going to take the path of least resistance. And you're right, that is terrifying in a lot of ways, because what I don't need is a robot to hallucinate a medical diagnosis. Like
Yes.
I don't need, and I don't need every single marketing piece that I see to say in the ever evolving landscape of higher education.
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
Exactly. Or every commercial look the same, or every ad looks the same because it's optimized to what they think is getting response, when in reality, the response is based on the fact that all the ads look like that.
Yeah.
And so there's an art and a science, and that's what's make this world great, is the fact that there's an art and a science. And again, I'm not knocking AI. If for those AI overlords who are listening, I love you. But we need smart people in education, teaching and receiving the knowledge within the university settings to help us figure all this out.
Yeah.
And how do we move forward in a way that again progresses mankind and then ultimately, mess us all up.
Well, and higher ed needs to own this, I feel
Yes.
like we have the philosophers, we have the engineers, we have the communicators, we have all of the people and the knowledge and the expertise in the world sits at universities. And so I really do feel like we need to be leading this conversation in a bigger way than we currently have been. I feel
100%.
like, and I feel part of that is because we see each other as competition, so we're not collaborating in this space. And I wish higher ed would, like everybody knows, I end every episode with "Let's go bust some silos," and typically that's interpreted as busting them on your own campus. But I think institutions are siloed amongst themselves, and they need to bust those silos too.
Well, I think, and you are 100% right, but I also think a lot of that is taking place, and where universities and colleges could do a better job is communicating that fact. If I think about what colleges could do to really kind of reverse this mindset around the fact that they're too insular or they're too opaque or they're this or they're too that, we need to be able to better connect Peter and Paul on Main Street to the university. Whether it's, hey, did you know that Peter and Paul on Main Street went to that university and they learned the skills to create this mom and pop business? Or Peter and Paul on Main Street depend on that university's business or the business of the alumni from that university, or they use tools, services, inventions, everything else that came out of that university. The fact that universities have education consortiums or research teams that are cross university that created some of the most amazing products and services that we have, or ideas that we have, and here's how they've affected you as a human being. We need to tell that story a little bit more often, a little bit better. I think about the issues with the grants at the Ivy Leagues. And when I share people, not to get political, but when I share with people the kinds of research that's being done with those grants, they're amazed. And, medical breakthroughs, scientific breakthroughs, communications, telecommunications, technology, these things, so much of it would not exist without the individuals who are working not just at the Stanfords and Harvards of the world, but at the regional publics and even, the very large universities. They're producing experts in their field who are doing amazing things. And we need to tell those stories, I think, a little bit more often.
Yeah. I mean, even those breakthroughs that are happening at commercial labs, the people who work there likely have PhDs that they got at universities.
Yes.
It's we're not just grabbing random people off the street and they're inventing stuff. Right?
Exactly.
Those people got their knowledge from somewhere, and you're absolutely right. And actually I have a guest line up for, I think, 2 shows from now that's going to be talking about how his university has focused on telling those research stories in ways that aren't just Professor X or Y did this thing that's like super technical sounding and isn't it cool, but breaking down what that means. for
Yes.
the public. Like this thing that this professor figured out means that now we can use 25% less pesticides on a crop.
Absolutely. And, I was laughing with something the other day. I said, we need to do like what a lot of, I think Coke and others have done, where they take their product that's in movies over time, and we do that in education. I mean, Indiana Jones was a college professor, right? He was he was a history and archaeology professor, right? There are so many examples of even fictional characters who, their real job was a college professor. I think I was thinking when we were talking about the movie Inception and how the mentor was a college professor. But the fact is, there are what college really is. I think we need to change the message from what people think about college, Animal House to Ivory Towers to the protests, to what college really is, which is, the research with real world applications, the business incubation, the community and charitable impact, the regional publics with super low tuition, in-state tuition, the flexibility of anytime, anywhere education that's with quality that's out there in so many institutions. It's just like, I think of it just like the government, right? People think of the government as this amalgam of lazy politicians and lazy government workers. And we know, if you know anyone who works in government, that's not the case, right? They're our neighbors. They're the people that protect us, that make us a functioning nation. And universities also, frankly, ensure that we're a functioning nation. We would not be a functioning nation without, in the 21st century, without a massive group of college graduates who have led the way over the last 150 years. That's just the reality. Whether you love it or hate it, that's the truth. And we can tell that truth and then focus on the transparency part around the investment to continue to make that happen.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason why so much of the developing world is sending their best and brightest to us for education, and then having them come back to do things that boost the economy, that boost the healthcare, that boost agriculture, boost engineering, boost fill in the blank in their countries.
Yes.
Because we have the best education system in the world here in the US. And it is so powerful what education does. And that was something, when I was 4 years old, this tall, my parents were like, you're going to college.
Yes, same.
They neither of them went. You're going to college, and education is the one thing no one can take from you.
Yes, my parents, I used to always think it was 13th grade.
Yeah.
I was just going to the next, it was just a matter of where. And, I think about, I live in Orlando, and UCF, University of Central Florida, here in Orlando, it's, depending on the year or the semester, it's the largest or second largest campus university in the nation. I struggle, outside of the space industry, I struggle to know what impact the tens of thousands of graduates have had, other than seeing people with the UCF frame around their license tag and knowing what business they're in. I know there are a million stories, but UCF is what I would call a prototypical college, right? It's not super elite like University of Florida may be, or it's not one of the obvious, obviously. But the impact that university has had on not just Central Florida, but around the country is undervalued. And the cost to attend UCF in-state is ridiculously low, which is why they have a ton of students and pump out a ton of graduates. And they go on to do amazing things. And the ability to tell that story more consistently in a real world way, I think would prevent people from having this perception that all universities are the 1% that you see on TV with these issues, these massive endowments or the massive protests or, perceptions of being this or that. That's not 90% of universities. It just isn't. And those 90% of universities, if I could come up with one thing, is that they tell their story better to the public and to legislators.
Oh, you make an excellent point about to legislators. And I think too, even when I was at an institution in Virginia Fox's district, and Virginia Fox has been very critical of higher education. And she would come and tour the schools in her district and be so complimentary and would very much be like, not you guys, but like the sector. And it's sort of that same thing where it would be like, this people don't like Congress people, but they like their congressperson.
Right.
It's because
Very well said.
they're hearing that story about the institutions in their backyard, but they're not hearing the overarching story of the value of higher education.
100%.
And they're having themselves swayed by, the bad actors that, and sometimes in some cases, like with the Varsity Blues case, the literal bad actors, and not necessarily thinking about how pretty much probably everything in this room was created by somebody who had a college degree.
Sure. Or as you said earlier, we all went to school. Every teacher, or almost every teacher at that school went to a college to learn how to teach you. And for decades now, that has occurred. And there are a lot of really great examples of how the ROI was extremely positive for the vast majority of students who attended college. Is it perfect? By no means. Colleges are certainly getting better and making themselves more accessible to students so that they can actually finish. And in our university, we have benefited from the fact that students have not been able to be successful in the past and can come to our university and have the access, both in terms of price and format, et cetera, to get it done. And we're very, very proud of that. More universities are trying to do that, which is a great thing to see. But the fact of the matter is, by and large, most people don't know what they don't know about college, other than it's expensive and you're going to come out with a degree that's, on a water basket weaving. That's the old joke, right? I would, as a marketer, I'd hire a history major tomorrow. I'd hire a comms major tomorrow. I'd hire a college graduate who was smart and could learn anything tomorrow because they went through the gauntlet of the discipline needed to take the classes and graduate. And that it's not easy and it shows fortitude. And if you can exhibit the fact that it taught you how to think, we're good.
To your point, when somebody has a PhD, it means they will buckle down and get something done. I mean, that's a symbol of you will go through a grueling, painful, miserable process.
Exactly.
And at the end, you have 3 letters after your name that say, I am willing to do really grueling stuff and persevere through it.
There are a lot of Navy SEALs who would not do a dissertation. I can tell you that right now. And vice versa as well. But yes, the dissertation process alone proves you've earned it.
Yes, for sure. Well, my last question is, if you were going to build a campaign to restore public confidence in higher ed, what would your message be?
Yeah, I think it really is in line with what I've been saying, in that the ability to draw a direct line between a college experience, which culminates in a degree, and real world things that affect your life, your potential life, or the life of the community in which you exist. We talk about, West Virginia, the university up there. I would imagine, because there are not nearly as many universities there as maybe other states, the halo effect of that university has got to be immense. If you were to talk to someone in Morgantown about the university, they would have deep respect and knowledge of that. But if you were to ask them about Southern Cal, those West Coast college kids. But if you look at the movies they've seen, I could draw a direct line between their favorite movie and Southern Cal, right?
Yeah.
So we have the ability, whether it's, as you said, pesticides, healthcare, engineering, technology, the internet, on and on and on. The things we can drive directly to not just an individual person at a university, but the fact that they were working in a department with assistants who were university students, and how as you said, the PhD process works, how graduates who just finished with a bachelor's degree in business were able to have the confidence to build a business of their own or go work to someone to expand that business. There are so many real stories we can tell that connect an investment, a reasonable investment in most cases, to be honest, to and massive exponential return on investment in terms of long-term impact on an individual, a business, and a community. And the ability to tell that story, if I'm at the University of Akron, or if I'm at Bowling Green, or some, Oklahoma State, a small college in Mississippi. They all have so many stories like that. And our ability as an institution, as an industry, a sector, to be able to tell those stories of regular people who went to college and did great things, I think that's where it is. We're living too much in the shadow of the elite universities who get all the praise and all the arrows.
Yeah.
90% of the universities are frankly ignored unless they do something crazy in a football or basketball field, but their stories are just as valuable as, a graduate of Yale University.
Yeah, absolutely. When I met with U.S. News and World Report a couple of weeks ago, one of the things I said was, next time you're doing a research story, scroll past Harvard and Berkeley and MIT and pick a regional R1. Pick a East Carolina. Pick an Old Dominion. Pick a school that isn't Virginia Commonwealth, that isn't the one that always gets the phone call. Because I guarantee there's cutting edge research happening there that they never get the phone call because they don't have that elite name that everybody knows.
Absolutely. I grew up and spent a lot of time in the Carolinas. The number of universities in North and South Carolina would blow your mind.
Yeah.
And 95% of them no one has ever heard of.
Yep.
But they are producing lots of graduates who do a lot of cool things. And a lot of those graduates are just working, but they're making their employers better, and they're earning enough to send their own kids who are also coming out and making their employers' communities better. And next thing you know, you've got a halo effect. So you're right. There are thousands of universities in America. We pay attention to maybe 200 of them, maybe, which means 90%.
Yeah,
no
for
one
sure
knows.
This was such a great conversation. Where can people find you if they want to connect?
Yeah, so you can just look me up on LinkedIn, Dale Leatherwood. I'm Chief Marketing Officer of Columbia Southern University, so you can certainly seek me out there. But I love to connect more with folks out in the space. As I said, I've been working primarily with non-traditional students in my career, and happy to provide support and assistance from that perspective. But I'm also very, very interested in helping share the story of what education can mean for America going forward.
I love it. I love it. I love this conversation. And listeners, as always, you can find me on LinkedIn at Jaime Hunt, JaimeHunt. You can also reach me by email at jamie@solvehighered.com, on my website, solvehighered.com, or you can find my book at heartoverhypebook.com. I always enjoy chatting with listeners, so please don't be afraid to reach out. And in the meantime, let's go bust some silos. Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO is part of the Enrollify podcast network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our shows help higher ed marketers and admissions professionals find their next big idea and feature a selection of the industry best as your host. Learn from Mallory Wilsey, Seth Odell, Jenny Lee Fowler, Eddie Francis, and so many other of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the leading AI-powered all-in-one student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful, personalized, and engaging interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.